Margaret Washington had cleaned houses for 37 years. Her hands knew the weight of a mop, the rhythm of folding sheets, the quiet satisfaction of making things right. At 52, she'd seen plenty in her time: fancy homes, difficult employers, children who barely noticed she existed. But something about the Hayes family felt different from the moment she walked through their door. The mansion stood in the wealthy part of town, all white columns and pristine gardens. Robert Hayes, the owner, was a self-made millionaire who'd built his fortune in real estate. He was a tall man in his early 40s, always in expensive suits, always on his phone, the kind of man who spoke in numbers and deadlines. His wife had passed away 2 years earlier. Cancer, the agency had told Margaret quietly. Now it was just Robert and his son, 8-year-old Danny. Margaret met the boy on her second day. He lay in an enormous bedroom with cream-colored walls and heavy drapes, propped up against a mountain of pillows. His brown hair fell across his forehead, and his eyes, dark and tired, barely registered her presence. "Hello, Danny," Margaret said softly, setting down her cleaning supplies. "I'm Margaret. I'll be helping around the house." The boy didn't respond. He clutched a worn teddy bear and stared at the ceiling. Robert appeared in the doorway, ending a phone call with a sharp tap. "He doesn't talk much anymore," he said, his voice heavy. "Not since he got sick." "How long has he been ill?" Margaret asked. 6 months. Maybe 7 now. Robert rubbed his face, and for a moment, the powerful businessman looked like nothing more than a frightened father. "The doctors can't figure it out. We've been to specialists in 3 states. They run tests, prescribe medications, but nothing helps. He just keeps getting weaker." Margaret looked at the boy, at the medicines lined up on his nightstand like soldiers, at the way he seemed to sink into those pillows. "I'm sorry," she said simply. Robert nodded and left, his footsteps echoing down the long hallway. Over the following weeks, Margaret fell into a routine. She cleaned the vast house, prepared simple meals, and always spent extra time in Danny's room. She'd talk to him while she worked, nothing heavy, just gentle observations about the weather, stories about her own grandchildren, memories from when she was young. Danny never responded, but sometimes she'd catch his eyes following her movements. The boy was clearly declining. Some days he could barely sit up. His skin had taken on a grayish pallor, and his breathing often sounded labored. The parade of doctors continued, men and women with impressive credentials and expensive briefcases, all of them leaving with the same puzzled expressions. "His symptoms don't match any clear diagnosis," she overheard one doctor tell Robert. "We've tested for everything from environmental toxins to rare genetic disorders." Robert's voice cracked. "There has to be something. We're doing everything we can." But Margaret noticed Robert was rarely home. Business calls pulled him away constantly. Meetings, deals, emergencies that couldn't wait. She understood. He was trying to hold his world together the only way he knew how, by working, by staying busy, by not falling apart. Still, she saw the guilt in his eyes whenever he had to leave Danny's bedside. One Thursday afternoon, Margaret was changing Danny's bedding. The boy was dozing in a chair by the window while she stripped the sheets. She'd done this task 1,000 times in 1,000 homes, but today something made her pause. The pillows. Danny had 6 large pillows on his bed, all expensive, all pristine white. Margaret picked one up to remove the case, and that's when she noticed the faint smell. It was musty, damp. She frowned and examined the pillow more carefully. The fabric seemed fine, but when she pressed it, she felt something odd about its density. She took it to the window where the light was better and squeezed it. A tiny cloud of dark dust puffed out from the seams. Her heart skipped. Margaret had seen mold before, in old houses, in bathrooms, in places where water had seeped and never properly dried. This looked like mold. She checked the other pillows. 3 of them showed the same signs: subtle discoloration around the seams, that same musty odor when she pressed them close to her face, that same dark dust. Danny slept on these every single night, breathing in those spores for hours. Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she set the pillows aside. She thought about all those doctors, all those tests. Had anyone checked the boy's immediate environment? His bedding? She went downstairs and called Robert's office. His assistant said he was in meetings all afternoon. "Tell him it's about Danny," Margaret said firmly. "Tell him it's important." 20 minutes later, Robert burst through the front door. "What is it? Is he worse?" The fear in his voice was raw. Margaret led him upstairs and showed him the pillows, explaining what she'd found. Robert stared at them, then at his son sleeping in the chair, then back at the pillows. "Mold," he whispered. "I think so, but I'm not a doctor. We need to have these tested, and we need to have Danny examined specifically for mold exposure." The next few days moved quickly. Robert had the pillows analyzed by a laboratory. The results came back positive for toxic black mold, Stachybotrys chartarum. The same lab tested Danny's bedroom and found mold spores throughout, concentrated especially in the bedding and the walls behind the headboard. A water pipe had leaked inside the wall 2 years earlier. It had been repaired, but the moisture had created the perfect environment for mold to grow, hidden from view. The expensive pillows, purchased just after the leak was fixed, had absorbed that moisture like sponges. Danny had been sleeping on them ever since. A new team of doctors examined the boy, this time knowing what they were looking for: chronic mold exposure. It explained everything: the respiratory problems, the fatigue, the mysterious decline that didn't fit any standard diagnosis. Within days of removing Danny from the contaminated environment and starting proper treatment, the boy began to improve. His color returned first, then his appetite. A week later, he sat up on his own. 2 weeks after that, Margaret walked into his room and found him playing with toy cars on the floor. He looked up at her and smiled. "Hi, Margaret," he said softly. She had to sit down. Tears filled her eyes, but she smiled back. "Hello, Danny. It's good to hear your voice." Robert had the entire house professionally remediated. He threw away everything that might be contaminated and had the bedroom rebuilt from the studs out. More importantly, he cleared his schedule. Margaret would find him sitting with Danny in the afternoons, reading stories or just talking. The phone still rang, but now Robert often let it go to voicemail. "I almost lost him," he told Margaret one evening. They were in the kitchen, and Danny's laughter drifted down from upstairs where he was having a bath. "I was so focused on finding a cure out there somewhere that I never looked at what was right in front of me." Margaret poured him a cup of tea. "You were doing your best. That's all any of us can do." "You saved him." "The doctors, all their degrees, all their equipment, and you're the one who figured it out." She shook her head gently. "I just paid attention. Sometimes that's all it takes." Robert was quiet for a moment. "Will you stay? I know you were only hired temporarily, but Danny needs consistency. He trusts you. And honestly," he paused, "I could use your help too. Not just with cleaning, with everything." Margaret thought of her small apartment across town, her routine, her other clients. Then she thought of Danny's smile, of the way he'd started talking again, of the life returning to this house. "I'll stay," she said. 3 months later, Danny started 3rd grade. He was still a bit behind his classmates, but his energy had returned. Margaret would help him with homework at the kitchen table, and Robert would join them when he got home, earlier now than before. One Saturday, the 3 of them worked together to plant flowers in the garden. Danny insisted on choosing all the colors, selecting bright yellows and deep purples. Margaret showed him how to dig the holes properly, while Robert fumbled cheerfully with the watering can. "We should plant them in a pattern," Danny announced. "Like a rainbow." "A rainbow garden," Robert said. "I like it." They worked in comfortable silence for a while, hands in the dirt, sun warm on their backs. Margaret watched the father and son laughing together, and something settled in her chest, a sense of rightness, of being exactly where she was meant to be. That evening, Robert asked her to sit down before she left for the day. "I've been thinking," he said, "about how things work, about what matters. I built a fortune, Margaret. I have more money than I could spend in 2 lifetimes, but I almost lost the only thing that actually mattered because I wasn't paying attention to the small things, the everyday things." He pulled out an envelope and handed it to her. "This is a bonus for saving Danny's life. But more than that, I'm raising your salary significantly and setting up a college, fund for your grandchildren. You've given me my son back. There's no way to truly repay that." Margaret opened the envelope and gasped at the check inside. It was more money than she'd make in 2 years. "Robert, this is too much." "It's not nearly enough," he said quietly. "You taught me that the people who really take care of us aren't always the ones with the most impressive credentials. Sometimes they're the ones who simply care enough to look closely. Years passed. Danny grew into a healthy teenager, then a thoughtful young man. He never forgot how sick he'd been or who had helped save him. He studied environmental health in college, determined to help others whose illnesses might be hiding in plain sight. Margaret stayed with the Hayes family. She watched Danny graduate, attended his college acceptance celebration, and cried happy tears at his wedding. She became part of the family in the way that really matters, not through blood, but through showing up, paying attention, and caring deeply. Robert never went back to his old ways of constant work and absence. He learned to be present, to notice the details, to understand that success meant nothing if you missed the life happening around you. And sometimes on quiet evenings, he'd find Margaret in the kitchen and they'd have tea together. They'd talk about Danny, about life, about the strange way things work out. "Do you ever think about that day?" Robert asked once. "When you found the mold?" "Sometimes," Margaret said, "but mostly I think about what came after. About second chances. About how paying attention to small things can change everything." Robert nodded. "I had all the resources in the world. But what Danny needed was someone who cared enough to look. Really look." Margaret smiled. "That's the thing about kindness. It doesn't cost anything, but it's worth everything." Outside, they could hear Danny laughing with his wife, planning their future, living the life he'd almost lost. The house was full of warmth and light, no longer the lonely mansion it had once been. And Margaret thought, as she often did, that this was what life was really about. Not the grand gestures or the expensive solutions, but the quiet act of paying attention, of caring, of being present enough to see what's really there. Sometimes the truth was hidden in something as simple as a pillow. Sometimes all it took to save a life was someone willing to look closely. And sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply show up, care deeply, and trust that our attention matters. Because it does. It always does.